So we can erase that out. And we do want the brightest point to be right in the middle. And then on these last ones, we'll have to make it fade off a little bit more. So these guys down here, not so bright. Just barely showing through a little bit. And then we're going to erase out like these little holes here. And in fact, we'll need to light the edge of those holes as well. I'll show you what I mean. We go to our new layer, bring this brush size down real small, too small, and just catch the edges of those hole tears because the light is going to be coming through. Okay, and then I'm just re-highlighting the edge of most of this. Another cool thing about digital is that if we decide that our midtone is too light for this image and we want to make it darker, we could do that really easily, which is actually what I'm going to do here in a second. I'm going to experiment with it because it feels not enough like this side of him is in shadow, but I don't want to have to go crazy with adding a whole bunch of shading over there. So all we have to do is lower its brightness, okay, and then we'll be able to, maybe not that far, okay, and then we can go back and kind of sketch in a really rough background, just like a texture or value. You'll see what I mean when we get to that. But let's do one last layer of darks for this. Okay, and this one's going to be at full opacity so that in these shadow areas, in fact, let's lower the opacity on this one just a little bit more to really help us get that effect. Can go into the shadow areas and really go deep dark black in the areas we need to. Can darken up some of these areas in his neck that we want to have a little bit deeper. And you can see that I'm putting way more detail and attention to the face, right? And leaving other areas farther back a little bit rougher. That's because the face is really the focal point, right? I still want to imply the value throughout the whole image, but what I really want people to focus on is the face, which is part of the reason why I'm leaving it a little bit more scribbly in the back end than I am in the front, okay? Just emphasizing some of these lines that were in the original drawing, maybe a little too much there. Just tone it back. Add a whole little layer of shadow along this side because we do want it to feel like this part isn't quite getting hit by the light like the other side is. And so we want this to all feel like it's falling into shadow. I'm going to darken up the areas over here where we want to feel like the light is glowing through, and then we'll even darken up this side a little bit since these guys aren't getting a lot of light coming through to them. So that really kind of helps it make it look like he's sort of glowing. And then what I'm going to do, I think I might just, let's do this. I'm just going to do a whole entire flat layer with a round brush here in order to get this whole area just a bit darker so it feels like it's in shadow, because right now it's too light and I don't want to go through with my entire pencil. That would take too long. I'm kind of going to use some digital magic here to just darken all of this side up. Not gonna worry, I'm not gonna get the fins because we want those to still feel like they're kind of glowing, right? Most of this, and then what I'll do is go back and erase it out, the parts that I want to keep light. And the cool thing too, once again, is that once we get this in here, we can adjust the opacity pretty easily. Okay, so I'm gonna grab my eraser tool really quick, just clean up some of these areas that I went outside the lines a little bit too much. All right, we could call that good. So now we can lower the opacity, get it about where I want, then go back with my eraser tool and I'm gonna erase out the parts where I don't want it to get that dark. For example, the top of his neck here is gonna be a little lighter. Right, just a few select areas that we don't want quite so pushed back. We can do a little bit of bounce light here on the bottom edge of these. Awesome. All right, that looks a lot better, I think. Feels a little bit more real. Let's do a little bit more erasing on the top of this part over here though, just to really help define the form a little more. Excellent. And then last step, the last thing we're gonna do to this guy is add kind of like a background. It's not going to be, I'm not going to draw any sort of a specific background. Instead, what it's going to be is, let's get our sketching pencil back. We're going to do kind of like a scribbled in background, just so that we have this kind of value to contrast against, because when you have the tone paper just next to another piece of tone paper background, it doesn't quite pop as much. But if you can kind of isolate it by making it seem like the background is a different color instead of just whatever the color of the paper is, then it'll help it feel a little bit more 3D and popping off the paper. So it helps a lot doing a tone paper drawing, because instead of having to shade in every value from basically everything up to white, from black till you get to white, you only have to do blackest parts and the whitest parts, and then you can leave anything that really falls into the mid-tone area mostly untouched, which makes things quite a bit easier for you as an artist to not have to paint or draw all of that. Oops. I'm going to speed this part up so you can see. We'll just, you can watch me do it. It's not very exciting, right? I'm just kind of scribbling this in here. So we're going to speed it up and skip ahead to the part where you can see. We won't skip ahead, we'll just speed it up to the part where you can see what it looks like when it's finished. Now, if you're doing this on your painting and you end up having a different lighting setup than what I went with, right? Then you might not want to do the background black. You might want to do it white, or just a different, maybe a shade of gray, because you want it. The purpose of this is to make the actual drawing contrast with the background. So if your drawing is really dark along most of the edges, right, and it's going to be blending in, then your focal point is going to be blending in with the background, then do a different value for the background, right? Because for mine, the focal point where I want people to mostly focus at has white along the edges on a lot of it, right? And so I want them to focus on the white, so the background is going to be black to help contrast that. I wouldn't put the background white. I mean, you could. Maybe you want to do like the whole bleeding edge thing, and we can, once we do this, we can just switch it all to white with the saturation slider just to see what it would look like. But you don't have to do black is what I'm saying. You can do either white or black or nothing, right? And there's lots of different techniques, right? You could do, like, I've seen people do like this cross-hatching thing, where, oops, not like that. Well, yeah, you could do that too. Or they do this is a really nice pattern, I think, all the way through the background. And you just tile that throughout the whole thing. That can look pretty nice and give some nice texture. For this, though, I just wanted to go black all the way. We're going to go all the way with it. Okay. I'm using my small brush to get in here, but for the most part, you want to keep it roughly the same size so that it doesn't end up looking kind of mismatched with all the different stroke sizes in there. For down there, it's okay. I'll just do it just a little bit. And I'm roughly just filling it out to kind of where I want the canvas size to feel like it's at. Right, so it's just going to be mostly like this big square. Then when we come up here to these guys, these are going to be kind of a pain. Now you might be asking, Austin, why don't you just go ahead and, just fill in the background, like do an outline like you did before? Well, I could do that, but specifically because I want this to look a certain way, and the way I want it to look is like a kind of more like a drawing, more painterly, then I'm doing this on purpose so that it has a little bit more of that texture. It doesn't just feel so perfectly smooth and finished, right? And at the end, after we finish this, I think what I'm probably going to do is we'll add a kind of like a paper background layer or an overlay layer and see if we like that, so that it looks even more like we drew it on paper. So once I finish up this part, we'll do that really quick. That shouldn't take long, and we can see the finished result. Now, this is a little bit more, it's still a sketch, but it is a little bit more of a refined sketch, right? But this is something that you could probably use to present, right, as an art piece, okay? And this gets you pretty close to being able to just paint this, right? Like if you wanted to, you could take this a step further and move this onto a painting level, right? You already have a lot of your values blocked out. You just have to really refine it and add color. and you could paint it. Okay, we're not going to do that for this because this isn't a course about painting, it's about drawing. But you know, as you do your 30-day drawing challenge and you get further and further in it, try venturing out a little bit more, try exploring with it, right? Maybe you just do really basic, simple sketches every day, which is fine, right? Those are still really good for practice. Don't stop doing those. But perhaps you decide you're going to branch out and try doing something like this, doing a little tone paper piece that's a little bit more challenging for you. So I encourage you to kind of take leaps like that in your art if you want to really be able to get better. Fill in all of this back here. We're getting pretty close to finishing up here. Just got to finish up these fins, and then once I have the background in, we're going to look over the whole image one more time just to make sure that all of the values are working correctly with the shadows and the lights on the painting, because having that background does kind of change our perception of some of those. So we're just going to do one last look through to make sure that it's working right, and then we'll add that overlay layer. A lot of times when we're beginner artists, we really want to rush through things, right? And just get it done. We don't really take our time. Or if we've already done something, we're really hesitant to kind of go back and redo it. And that's really the mark of an amateur. I know it's not fun, and it takes a lot of discipline to be able to go back and rework something that you've already spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours working on and refining, and then realizing that you need to go back and change it. It can be really frustrating and discouraging, but it's what sets apart kind of like a hobbyist from a real pro, being able to recognize when you need to change something and being willing to go back and change it, even if you've already sunk hours into working on the project. But luckily, we are drawing in layers and keeping it loose so that that is less likely to happen, right? Because the looser we start out, the more opportunity and time we have to fix mistakes before we get too refined, right? So now we can fill all the rest of this in. Boom. All right. Going to just clean up a little bit of these areas so it's not quite so many holes in the background. We want it to be a little tighter than this in some spots. All right, that looks good. And then let's go ahead. We're going to go back to our shadow layer, find some areas that I think need to be a little darker, such as underneath here, under his neck, as well as this ridge going down here, and then push a little bit darker in some of these crevices to really help define the forms. Just going to touch up some of these areas inside of his mouth. Okay, really push the darks in these areas. Maybe just a little bit up here on his brow horn, protrusion, whatever you want to call that. Push a little bit darker there as well. All right, and then gonna get our white, and we're gonna do one last, and we're gonna actually do this on top, on top of our black layer, because we don't want it to be covered up by any spots that we worked on. We're gonna do one last pass of a white outline along some of these edges to really make sure we have that light catching effect, in case there's any parts that we accidentally painted over that we didn't mean to. Oh, and that also reminds me, we're going to fill in the holes in the fin with black as well, because that part is see-through. Those are holes. We can also add just a little bit more in some of these areas where we want it to get all the way to that max. We're going to add that white outline to any of these areas over here that we really want to emphasize. So like the teeth, going to do it on all this side of his mouth and face, and then this tooth as well. Okay, tongue a little better, and then final touch, I'm going to just lower the opacity on it so it's not too crazy. Lower the opacity on that just a bit. About there is good. And then see if we want to raise the opacity on the shadow area. No, I think it looks good about there. Okay. Awesome. Now, let's do that last final touch we were talking about, which is going to be to add that paper texture. So, we have a new layer. It's going to be on top of everything else. We're going to insert a photo. I have mine saved under textures. I'm going to use this tone paper. And we're going to blow it up to cover the whole screen, the whole canvas anyways. Set it to overlay. And look at that. It looks like a freaking sketch. Done right out of a sketchbook. And you can work with this as much as you want if you want it to be full opacity and just have it look like that, right? Or maybe you want, let's do another one. We'll duplicate this layer. So you could do kind of like this brown tone paper, or you can do a completely desaturated one where it looks pretty much like how we were drawing, just with some texture. I actually kind of like this one a bit more. I think it looks really cool. And yeah, so that's it for this lecture. Hopefully you got something out of this. I know this one was kind of long, but it's a really cool technique, and if you can, it takes some practice, but if you can learn to master it, you can really make some really awesome, beautiful images. So that's it for this one, and I'll see you guys next.